Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hiba.
And I'm Zaid,
You're listening to Diary of a Matchmaker.
a podcast that will take you into our world as matchmakers.
We'll share our experiences and offer advice for the single Muslim.
So let's dive in.
Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, welcome to another episode. I'm Zaid and on the other mic is my wife and co-host Hiba.
Assalamu alaikum.
So have you heard of the term the Haram Police?
What?
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Who hasn't?
So growing up, the thing that I found most interesting when we were first courting was our mutual interest for art. Mm-hmm. Specifically, your love for classical music. Obviously I shared my love for live theater, and it was one of the things that we connected so much on. It was the first time, honestly, like the shocking thing is that you were studying Sharia and yet you loved classical music. And I'm like, this is the most unusual combination that I have ever seen talking to girls. And I've talked to a lot of girls.
It's classical music, not belly dancing. So.
Obviously, but still, like, I felt there was such a huge conflict in that. Maybe it's just because of the way I've been raised and what I've been taught. But yeah, that combination I just never seen before. And
I'll take it as a compliment then.
Yeah. But it's interesting when we were talking about the topic of the Haram Police, which we'll get into. Your experience with music and art is very similar to mine.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. With what people have said to you in the past and some of that. So how did your love for classical music come about, and what was your experience kind of pursuing that in the Muslim community?
Yeah, well, I think before I went to study Sharia, it wasn't a big deal. But after I went to Jordan to study Sharia, suddenly, I remember once we were sitting at my parents' living room, and an auntie, a friend of the family, a friend of mine, and a very dear person to my heart, she was visiting us. And she's known as the wa'idha, the da'iyah of the village. She's a very pious person. And she asked, I can't remember what the conversation was, and the topic of music came up. And she's like, oh, you don't listen to music, right? Or I hope you don't listen to music.
So in a very passive-aggressive way.
If I remember correctly, yeah. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, I froze. I said, no, of course I don't listen to music. I didn't want to be judged by a person that I respect and love so much.
Right. And you were young. You were, what, a teenager?
No, this is when I went to Sharia.
Oh, you're right. You sure? Yeah. So you were mid-20s, late 20s.
Late 20s, yeah.
Late 20s. Wow. Yeah. But yeah, I've dealt with the same thing in high school, even post-high school. Whether, especially when I was considering pursuing theater as a full-time career, people like my closest friends, relatives, everybody would make comments, kind of give passive-aggressive remarks, and then adding to the fact that, I completed my hifz and I would leave.
Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah. That didn't make it any easier.
So, I'm completely abandoning the religion and pursuing something that's completely different from what the religion encourages. Mm-hmm. It was difficult because I felt like I had to choose between two paths.
Yeah, exactly.
Either I can commit myself to my religion, and or I can quote unquote abandon my religion and then pursue art, because that's what the cost is.
They make it seem like somebody who's gay and Muslim saying I'm gay and I'm Muslim.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good analogy.
So how does this relate to marriage anyway?
So I think it relates to marriage is specifically in a topic that we've discussed before, when culture dictates the marriage process. Yeah. Right? Because a lot of these beliefs, and we can go further down the rabbit hole, right? People feel that celebrating birthdays are haram, celebrating anniversaries. The list goes on and on. Mm-hmm. People, for some reason, think that the default is haram, when in fact it's the opposite.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah. The default is haram unless there's an evidence to support the opposite, right?
If you guys are listening, please understand that the Islamic principle is that when it comes to worldly matters, the default is halal unless there is evidence that it is haram.
Exactly. Yeah.
But when it comes to matters of worship, it's the opposite.
Yeah. So most people, when you ask them, oh, why is this haram? They would say, like in the case of my mother, for example, why do you think music is haram? Even though we would catch her when she's cooking in the kitchen, like singing to herself. So why do you think music is haram? Oh, haven't you heard the sheikh, like such and such said it's haram? I heard it on YouTube. Like, so most of the people, they don't know exactly the evidence, the ayah, the hadith, and they're just very easily manipulated. Yeah. Now, please, anyone who's listening and who takes the opinion that music is haram, we are not mocking. We're not judging. We're not mocking at all.
We're just sharing our experiences and how our lives have kind of been shaped by these beliefs.
Hey, if you have a story to tell, we'd love to have you on. Here you'll find a safe space of listeners who can understand what you're going through. Just shoot us an email with a summary of your story at info@halalmatch.ca. So how does this whole discussion about the Haram Police, how does it relate to marriage and matchmaking?
Especially when it comes to marriage, culture plays such a part. And so much of what I've seen, both personally and professionally, is dictated by culture. Whether it's, having 50 functions before the wedding, the unrealistic mehers, the courting process, the fact that you have to jump through 10 different hoops to talk to the girl or the guy.
Yeah.
All of that. There's just so much culture that's infused when in reality our religion is just so simple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I realized we didn't explain what is the Haram Police for anyone who doesn't know.
So the Haram Police is basically when, you are out and about and you're doing your business, you're not doing anything haram, yet that auntie or uncle or that sheikh from the community says, you can't be dressed this way, you can't be doing this, you can't be speaking a certain way.
This is haram, this is haram.
This is haram, that's haram, that's haram, that's
you
haram.
Get a car, you get a car, you get a car.
I think we used that meme, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
So to any Gen Z here, we are referring an Oprah Winfrey show episode. And if you don't know who Oprah Winfrey is, then
I pity you.
Astaghfirullah, like inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
Yeah.
But
regardless. Yeah, that's the Haram Police. So growing up, I remember one of my teachers, who actually happened to be a sheikh, would say that clapping after morning assembly is haram because that's symbolic of the nation of Lut. I remember hearing things like Harry Potter is haram. Reading the books is haram because it has so much to do with black magic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
When at the end of the day, it's just a fiction. It's a fictional novel.
I just remembered one time I was praying in the dark, I think. And mom was saying, oh, the other day I heard a sheikh, he said praying in the dark is haram. I swear.
Wow.
Yeah. So mom, what's your basis? Like, what is the evidence? I don't know, but the sheikh said it. I mean, he's a sheikh, so
yeah,
it must be true.
And a lot of this talk and to put it bluntly, nonsense, comes from the belief that Islam is a very strict and quote unquote difficult religion.
Yeah.
Right?
Like you have to suffer here.
Not just suffer here, but I also think that there's this drive to separate ourselves from non-Muslims. So anything that we do that is similar to Muslims,
to non-Muslims,
to non-Muslims is haram. Okay. Birthdays, anniversaries, it's all bid'ah.
Yeah.
Right? Because non-Muslims do it.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know, it's so crazy.
Yeah.
It's like this deep-seated belief that Islam is difficult and that anything that resembles joy is haram.
You have to suffer here in order to earn Jannah. When in fact you can have joy here and joy in the afterlife, right?
Yeah. You can.
The Prophet ﷺ is always smiling. He was always he didn't live a miserable life.
Yeah, but he went through hardship after hardship.
Of course. That's all the ibtila from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah. So Sheikh Naveed, who we just interviewed a few weeks ago, made an excellent point about the courting phase. That so much of what is allowed during the courting phase gets labeled as haram.
Yeah.
When there is so much flexibility.
Yeah.
There's so much that we can do to assess compatibility, but we just immediately think, oh my God, a guy and a girl talking
Astaghfirullah.
before marriage, that's haram.
That's like basically zina.
Right. When there's so much allowed, when there's permission from the wali, when, as long as they're not in khalwa, which
They're not physically touching.
all of those
right intentions.
Exactly. When all of those conditions are in place, there's so many options, so much variety, so many different ways you can assess compatibility.
Now, somebody might hear you and say, Astaghfirullah, look at these people. They're trying to dilute the deen and just cater. So, like, to each extreme, there's another extreme.
Yeah.
Us in the Middle Eastern culture, we have another concept. So, you don't hear this is haram as much as you hear this is aib. And to any non-Arab here, aib is something that's like socially very frowned upon.
It's simply shameful.
Yeah, exactly. And anything could be labeled as aib, whether it's actually haram or not. Like, for example, if you remember when we went back home to visit my family last year, and we were just walking in the street and Dad was with us and we were holding hands. And my dad was like, no, don't do that. That's aib. Like,
even though we're a married couple.
Even though we're married, we're in public, we're not like kissing, we're just holding hands.
Right.
And I'm like, subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ used to walk with his wives, used to race with his wives.
Yeah.
And yet, I don't know, I don't want to see like we feel like we're better than the Prophet, because of course that's not the intention. But why did we restrict ourselves so much when the deen didn't?
I don't know. It's just we've, like I said, I keep coming back to this, we've allowed culture to dominate our beliefs for so long. And the sad thing is, and this is the important thing that I hope people take away from this, that we want as Muslims to be inviters to Islam.
Yeah.
Right? Especially to fellow Muslims, because people are on different spectrums of the religion. Somebody might just be hanging on to Islam by a thread, and they may be steeped in sin. And so by further reminding them of what's haram, you are further pushing them away from Islam rather than inviting them and bringing them closer to Islam. So always be a source of invitation, always be gentle and empathetic as much as you can, without compromising or diluting the religion itself.
Yeah, and there's always a concept of priorities. So there's a saying for a scholar that for some reason I forgot his name right now. And he says, if an imam goes to a town that the riba has spread so bad in this community, and he goes to the minbar and gives them a maw'idah and says, your women need to cover up, then he's done more harm than benefit, because there are priorities. So right now, like, we have huge problems in our Muslim community, whether it's in the East and in the West. And we're still like, you still find people focusing on, no, you can't wipe on your socks. That's haram. Like pity stuff. I'm not mocking the ahkam. We're not mocking the Sharia. Astaghfirullah. But I mean, there's some bigger issues to focus on, right? The division of the ummah, the I don't know, deterioration of the youth. Like, there's a huge problem of atheism in the Middle East. I don't know if you're in Saudi, in Egypt.
Atheism,
yes.
I didn't know that.
Ever since the Arab Spring, and a lot of the young people, they were shocked by what scholars, we call them ulama al-sultan, which are like the scholars hired by the
puppets
king
of the kings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were shocked by their reaction. Like, it was a big fitna. A lot of young Muslims are leaving the deen, and we're still talking about wiping on the socks and I don't know, can't cut your hair in a specific way, and the length of your thobe.
Yeah, we're getting stuck on these very trivial topics for sure.
Yeah. Another factor that makes it very difficult for single Muslims to get married, which gets labeled as haram, the mixing between the genders.
We've discussed
the segregation episode, but
honestly, we could talk about this over and over again.
Yeah.
Because it's just something that is so overdone, so much overlooked, and one of the factors I sincerely believe that is hurting Muslims more so than anything when it comes to marriage. I mean, forget the apps, forget culture, forget everything else. I really think it's segregation that's the number one factor that's hindering Muslims from finding a compatible spouse.
Especially in the masjid.
Especially
like
in the masjid.
Just recently, we were in touch with a brother from a specific MSA, and we agreed on a date to go deliver our workshop, and alhamdulillah, we were excited. But then, like, days before,
just literally a few days before, they said, no, we don't feel comfortable.
There are brothers in our MSA that don't feel comfortable about having
a workshop with the opposite gender in the same room or something along those lines.
Even though we're going to have guys sit on one side of the room, girls sit on the other side of the room, but they felt this is way too liberal.
Right. So just for the sake of clarity, one of the conditions that we like to have with our workshop is that there is no physical barrier. So that when we are addressing both girls and guys, they can see each other's responses, that we have freedom to address both genders and understand what the gender expectations are, the different ways that the genders think.
And that guys and girls can see each other. They're sitting in a very safe space. They can see each other, can see each other's reactions to questions.
Exactly. So the point is that it's an essential element of our workshop. And unfortunately, MSAs are more religious than Islam itself. I'm not trying to like pick on MSAs, but I mean, I got to keep it real here. This is what we've been seeing. So we're not going to compromise on our workshop, but we could talk about our workshop on another episode.
You know, I studied Sharia, and we sat in the same classroom. Like
Were you guys sitting on the same table as them, or was it like a visible barrier?
No barrier, but guys used to sit in the front rows and girls used to sit in the back. So if you want to fix your hijab, if you want to be comfortable, like guys are not looking at you. Right. But it was the Kulliyat Sharia, faculty of Sharia, and like in a Muslim country, we had female professors, male professors, and there was nothing wrong with that. So I don't know what's up with MSAs. To anyone who is listening who's single and who's going through the journey of finding a spouse, what can they apply from this episode?
Like we've said, I mean, we talked about this in the culture episode. Remember that Islam is a very simple religion. It's a very simple way of life. And what's haram is just very small in number. And what's halal can even be counted.
Yeah, because like we said, the default is halal.
There's a verse in the Quran where Allah says, if you were to count the bounties of Allah, you would not be able to. وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا.
Right.
And the point of that, and the reason I'm referencing that, is because we have so many halal options available to us. Even if you go to the grocery store, right? The numbers of things that you won't be able to eat there are a fraction of what you can eat there.
Of course.
So just bear in mind that, getting married is a very simple process. Yes, finding the right person can be challenging. Maintaining a marriage can be challenging also.
So there's no reason to make it harder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So be easy on yourself. Don't make Islam a difficult religion.
Yeah.
It's already difficult to implement in a non-Muslim country. So there's no reason to make it more difficult upon yourself.
Just preserve the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
And let your intention guide you.
So have you ever been a victim of the Haram Police? Have you ever been pulled over and arrested for doing something haram?
Have you got a ticket? Haram ticket?
Did you get fined? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, and we'll see you next episode, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.